So again, we have a quorum here. So I'd like to call the meeting to order. This is the Sherborn Advisory Committee public meeting of Wednesday, October 6, 2021. Can I get a motion from an advisory member to open the meeting?
Motion to open the meeting.
All right, got a motion. Can I get a second?
Second.
All right, roll call vote to open the meeting. Mark Albers.
Aye.
Peter Galtano. I assume Peter is Peter Galtano. Is that you, Peter? Maybe it's not Peter Galtano. Dan Sickle.
Yes, aye.
Natalie Weir.
Aye.
Wasim Basili.
Aye.
Brendan Daly.
Recording in progress.
Well, I guess I am also an I, so I'm number 5. So I'm the fifth member, so that's the quorum just to open the meeting. I'm just gonna give everybody a little more time to straggle in. It is also 7:04 p.m. Any chance I could get a volunteer from advisory to take minutes?
I can.
Wasim, thank you. All right,
is Wasim doing it?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
And now Jane Matarazzo has joined. That's another little wrinkle of the open meeting law with virtual meetings, is that every time a member of the committee joins or leaves the meeting, I am supposed to announce it. All right. So I still actually don't have confirmation that Peter is Peter Galtano and that BD is Brendan Daly. If you guys are currently on here, could you just give a little shout out? All right, well, we've got at least 6 active members of the advisory committee on here right now. So I think we'll
I
get
just
it
saw
started.
Peter send a message. He's having some audio challenges, but he is, that is him.
Okay, great. All right, so then Peter's in the chat. I guess, Peter, if you are unable to join audio, I guess I'll just monitor the chat and I'll try to read out anything that you have to say. And I would assume that you can probably do your roll call votes on the chat as well. All right, so first item is the agenda. So we've got the open meeting and roll call, addition of topics not reasonably anticipated by the chair 48 hours in advance of meeting. Does anybody have any items that they would like to add to the agenda? All right, hearing none. Then we'll have liaison reports. Then we have a small group of Arpa fund requests to go through. And then we're going to discuss our fiscal year 23 guidance, and then we will approve last meeting's minutes, which I believe Brendan sent out the revised minutes to everybody. So hopefully you guys have the revised minutes. All right, so does anybody have any issues with the agenda? All right, if not, then we will move on to the liaison reports. I'll start just by saying I did attend the regional school committee meeting. I think that was last week. It was one that I think none of the 3 liaisons were able to make it to. But specifically, and Steve Leahy has joined the meeting. I think we were interested in the capital stabilization fund thing that they were discussing, and it turns out it wasn't actually a stabilization fund a capital reserve fund. It was not a fund for the region. It was a fund for some sort of larger umbrella group that the region is part of that I guess provides special education services to various schools. And so that organization was setting up a capital reserve fund, and they just needed all of their member districts to approve it. So that's what they were voting on. So it was another umbrella organization above the region that was establishing it. All right. Does anybody have any liaison reports? I know one of the things I was hoping for was that some of the liaisons to the larger departments would have liaised with some of their departments. So does anybody have anything to bring? Jane, you are muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Just while we're on the subject of schools, the previous school committee meeting, regional school committee meeting, perhaps not surprisingly, but they have a lot of money to return to the towns. I believe it was close to $650,000 total, which means that Sherborn would be getting, maybe around $300,000 back. So I guess it's good news, bad news. Good news that we're getting the money back, but bad news that they were that far over or under budget, I guess.
Yeah.
Really
Do you know,
sad.
did they say was a lot of that sort of COVID related in terms of?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they
And
are.
was it a combination of not needing as much and also receiving a lot of reimbursements for things? Or was it mostly just the not needing things?
Mostly not needing things, because the COVID money is supposed to be spent on things that were unanticipated, not regular budgetary things. So it was really, things that they just didn't do because school wasn't in session the whole time, or they didn't have full staff, or they didn't have as much transportation. So, it's understandable to to a great extent, but it is, as we all know, kind of symptomatic of a larger issue that has been going on at the schools for a while, in terms of really exceeding that, not just the 5% maximum excess and deficiency, but even, blowing above that.
But because those were sort of like COVID related sort of decreases, I would assume that we should not anticipate that in the coming year they will reduce their budget. Or, I mean, realistically, if they are running at full steam ahead this year-ish, they probably will actually need that money that they didn't last year. Is that a reasonable assumption? Or is that still up for debate?
I mean, they would say so.
Yeah, I know they would say so. But.
And I think for the most part, that's accurate. I think it's likely that they will have some money to, some excess and deficiency money to put towards the budget, as they have for the past, for this year's budget, as they have for the past couple of years. So, that might be another option as well. But I just think we need to, especially with the interim superintendent, I think it's just an unknown as to how they will, Dawn's still there and Dawn does a great job, but I think it's an unknown as to what her direction might be, from the interim.
And
I-
Gene, if I could just be clear, that 650 that they plan to return, with about 45% coming away, that means that their E&D budget is fully, that overage of 5% is fully maxed out. This is 650 above and beyond that 5%.
Right.
Yep.
Right. And I know in most years, we try to ask them if maybe they want to have their E&D closer to 4%. And I think they always say no, right? So we know that their E&D is almost always right up at 5%.
Steve, I think I fixed my audio.
Oh, super.
This is Peter Gallicano for those on the call. This is a temporary one-time, two-time windfall, which next year they're gonna, or this year, they will create next year's budget off of this year's budget. And so what we want the schools to ultimately do is what the advisory board used to do when we had a lot of free cash, is spend it on one-time capital items and not create this systemic deficit going forward, so that in the year COVID +2, we're not hit with a huge increase because those monies dried up, yet the fixed and variable costs still remain there. So it's great in the short term. In the long term, we want to keep that spending trend, or our share of that spending trend, as close to the real cost as possible.
Yes, I agree. Great. Anything else on the schools? All right. If not, any other liaison reports? I feel like I got an email from somebody about police saying that, I think, was it you, Mark? Saying essentially, I think we're expecting the new chief to start in November. So I think a lot of their sort of budgetary and overall strategery is probably on hold until the new chief takes over. Was that accurate?
I think that's right. I just exchanged some emails with Dave Bento, and that was what he was saying. I think if it wasn't November 1st, it was right around the 1st of the month, the new chief is supposed to start. So I think he just kind of pushed us off until then, because he wasn't really sure what the priorities were going to be for the incoming chief. I talked to fire as well last week. And as far as 23, there's some what I would call minimal capital expectations. And then the operational budget was pretty much in line with what we would expect. So there's no big surprises there.
Great. And I don't suppose any of the school liaisons talked to Don.
I have not.
I feel like I wouldn't have, I don't think I would have engaged in that yet either if I were you, but. And then what about DPW? I don't even remember who the liaisons for DPW are, but did anyone get in touch with Sean?
It was Peter and I have not. I tried once and Sean and I missed each other and I forgot to follow up.
That's right.
Nor I have not contacted Sean.
Okay, no problem. All right, any other liaison reports? All right, if not, then I think we'll move on to the ARPA fund requests. I believe that everybody should have gotten the ARPA fund requests emailed from Deb via me. There is one change. I believe it was the farm pond item. I think that the consultant said that we needed more information on that, so we're gonna push the farm pond one off. But all the other ones we're gonna discuss. I'm gonna just try to share my screen here. Alrighty, can everybody see this? And is it legible?
Yes.
All right. All right, so I think we'll probably just take these in order. But I guess this is actually a nice summary so far of what we've approved. In total, I guess we have approved 305,000 out of our 1.295. So that leaves us with just under $1 million. The request that we're looking at today in total will be just over $12,000. So first up, we have the Board of Health, and I think I saw Daryl's here, right? So Daryl Beardsley of
here.
the Board of Health, I guess, do you want to tell us about this particular, this is the medical expenses and payroll costs in a total of $8,832.20.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. So let's start down below, the box down below. We have a contract with the Walpole Natick Visiting Nurse Association, and they work on infectious diseases of all sorts. COVID has kind of made them more visible, their service to the town, but they've always done that. And we have sort of a low-level contract with them for just a few hours per week, really. Except during COVID times, that has gone up quite high at certain times of the pandemic. Recently, the expenses have been lower than what we were seeing. We were seeing more around $5,000–6,000 a month, but the state reinvigorated the contact tracing cooperative. And because our visiting nurses also serve some larger towns, they are quite busy in those other towns. So more of our cases, and we do continue to have a steady stream of cases, are being sent to the state. Therefore, that expense has gone down somewhat. However, so these are the actual expenses that we incurred during the time period noted, and that's for the visiting nurses. And then on the payroll side, Ellen continues to work round the clock every day of the week often. So those are also expenses actually incurred. It's fairly straightforward. And the expenses are due to COVID. Some of it, I would say, is due to COVID. We've had as many or more applications for well permits and septic systems and other activities in the first half of this year as we usually do all year. And so the real estate market has been very hot, and that has led to heightened activity. And the market is hot because of COVID. So in a way, it is related. Are there any questions about that?
I've got one question about the payroll costs. Is that the amount that is beyond what was normally budgeted, right? That's not the total amount that Ellen has been paid during this period?
Yes, the Board of Health voted early on to compensate Ellen for the enormous number of hours. She's always worked extra hours, but this is really extreme and has been demanding, and lots of meetings that she attends that the main topic has been COVID. And it's been essential to us to keep up with what's going on and what the programs are and what the rules are about everything.
Great.
I had a question about that, though. Am I mistaken? I thought that Ellen was a salaried employee. Is that not the case?
She is a salaried employee, and we pay her at least 50% lower than what other towns pay people in the same position. So the Board of Health made the decision that it would have been abusive to not compensate her, because this has been a very grueling time.
No, I don't have a quarrel with the fact that she's working hard, but I just, and I don't know, Diane may know the answer to this. Has anyone even, posed a question to town council about this? Because, to pay overtime to an exempt employee is certainly unusual. Let's put it that way.
Apparently, there are quite a number of employees in town who are availing themselves of this. So
That doesn't answer Jane's question. Once you classify an employee, certain rights and privileges come with that. And again, two rights don't make a wrong. we want to be very careful that we're not treating a salary employee like a hourly employee, nor an hourly employee like a salary employee, because there are clear demarcations between both.
And I had a question, Daryl. This is Natalie Weir. Was that decision that Board of Health made, was that run by the Personnel Department?
Yes. We did not proceed with this independently. We came to advisory. It was reviewed by Select Board and by HR in town. So we could not have done it independently, right? There's a whole system set up for people to enter the extra hours associated with this.
Diane, do you know if town council has been consulted on any of this?
Excuse me?
Well, I was asking Diane, I don't know, Daryl, you may know as well, but I thought
I
Diane-
believe, Daryl, Jane, this is Diane. I believe that David did consult with town council. But I will double check with him tomorrow when one of us will get back to you.
That sounds
Yeah,
right.
I do know, and to support Daryl's position, that if the extra job is different from her salary job, then you can have two different jobs. And I don't know if it is presented as such, but that's how you can avoid it. It's moonlighting. They call it moonlighting. She's moonlighting as a COVID person, and that's separate and distinct from her regular Board of Health position. So that may be the way to present this.
Okay, and they are tracked as COVID-related hours.
I think that's
She
true,
documents all of
Daryl.
them.
That's true for all of the town employees who are getting extra COVID pay, right? They're being the additional pay and or hours that they are racking up are separately tracked as COVID hours.
I don't know how everybody else is doing it.
Currently, there is nobody else receiving any money for COVID.
Okay.
Ellen's the only one.
Okay.
And actually, we would like to increase her salary at some point. That it's just been a little busy lately, but that has been on our radar, and we have brought it up a number of times.
Is that something you're anticipating in for the FY23 budget for the Board of Health?
I haven't yet, but no, I don't have an answer for that just yet.
Okay, no problem. And Brendan Daly has entered the meeting. All right.
This
Does
is,
anybody-
Maybe subject to whatever information Diane gets from David. Perhaps that would change.
hey, this is Dan Sickle. Can I get in with a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Great, thanks. So the moonlighting thing sounds fine to me if that works. I know in other government contexts, I don't know in the context of municipal things that people sometimes get bonuses for extraordinary performance, and that's another way in other contexts that these kinds of payments are sometimes explained and rationalized. And then also, Daryl, is this money that was already paid out, or is this in anticipation of, with this approval, then the money would be paid out? Just trying to track the cash flows.
I would assume that most of this has been paid out, but the 925, the
Okay.
expenses incurred, I don't know if they have.
Okay,
already-
but most of it's been paid. That's all I'm after, not down to the penny.
No, I can clarify that all the requests that you're looking for right now, these are all expenses that have been incurred in the first quarter here from July the 1st through September the 30th.
Okay.
And to help with the approval process, we've been charging them to the department's budget.
Okay.
So with your approval, this will take it out of their budget and put it against the ARPA spending account.
Yeah, and then that frees up budget resources for other things later in the year.
Yeah, obviously none of these things were budgeted as such in the operating
course.
fund.
But that's perfect. Thanks. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. The other tiny thing I'd mention, and I'm going to get a bad reputation for saying this, but I just note down at the bottom or near the bottom, upon select board approval, request will be sent to advisory. I think it's actually going in the opposite direction. And some of the different proposals, some of the different ARPA proposals say different
Yeah.
things there. So
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This was sent out and then it changed, and I didn't catch that until they were being returned. I tried to draw a line through there, but I'm not sure that the line was very dark.
and it's not just this one, it's a number. So I just know
Yeah,
that much that
exactly. But yeah, thanks for pointing that out. I did notice it after the fact.
great.
Yeah,
Good.
it looks like
Thank
it's been changed for the later ones. So
Yeah, perfect. Thanks. That's it for me.
I just
right,
have
great.
one comment about, you mentioned about the concept of bonuses. So we had considered that, but the board felt that if there was an option to compensate for the actual hours worked, we felt that was cleaner, more transparent, trackable, all the rest. So it just seemed a smarter way to go about it than a lump sum.
Thanks.
So my only comment on that, I also have concerns about wage and hour issues. And I would want town council to weigh in before approving this as overtime. I could see that being problematic.
well, I guess, Brendan, I guess the issue is that the pay has already been approved. So essentially what we're doing is we aren't deciding whether or not this this payroll stipend increase will get paid or not. We're just deciding whether or not we are going to categorize it as ARPA funds or not.
Brendan, I can address your concern. When we have moonlighters that are paid at $10 an hour and they do another job, we pay them at a regular rate of time and a half. So it's not overtime. That moonlighting job is at a rate that is time and a half. And so it's fair to the employee, and it segregates the regular job from the moonlighting job. Again, the presentation, I'm not sure if it's clearly laid out, but that's how you can have one person do two types of jobs and have two different pay rates, for which is fair because they're separate and distinct. So you're not going to be calling it overtime on the normal job, but
Yeah, I think that's fine. I'm not suggesting we solve anything here. I do think it would be worth raising the issue with town council, and we can leave it there.
Okay, between Diane and I will check that out tomorrow.
But I have no objection to, getting reimbursement through ARPA.
So Brendan, do you feel like you can't vote on this tonight
No,
until we?
I'm fine with voting on it. I
Okay.
do think that there is a potential issue the way that it was done.
Sure.
And it's probably worth raising the issue with town council.
Okay, great. So then Deb and Diane, I guess you guys can clarify with town council to make sure that they've reviewed this scenario and approved it.
Got it.
Because I imagine that this isn't going to be the last time that we need to do this for Ellen, right?
Correct.
I wish COVID was over, but that doesn't look like it's happening immediately.
So any other questions or comments before I bring this to a vote?
A quick question about the medical expense. So this is, I would assume that similar expense we would have had last year as well, right? This is not only new for this year, correct?
Correct. So this is above and beyond the flat contract that we have with them that in normal years was sufficient to cover their services. So
Okay, right.
we've been incurring, I don't know if we've had zero during COVID, but as high as $5,000 or $6,000 a month for the extra expenses related to tracking COVID cases primarily.
Okay, but
From the visiting nurses.
these expenses are for the period, I think, what is it, seven?
July the 1st,
Yeah,
July the 1st through September.
Right. So in prior periods, I would assume we would have had similar extra expenses as well, right?
Yeah.
We're higher. This is low.
I see.
Yeah, if you look at that summary sheet, that very first sheet that Stephen had up there, if you look at approved request, that second line down was $77,352. A number of those Walpole visiting nurses was in there along with Ellen's Board of Health pay, extra cleaning. At the time, we were just putting it right against the ARPA account rather than going through the operating budget. But as of July the 1st, David decided that it would be cleaner to actually put it in the operating budget so that you could actually see what the charges are as we go along. And so to help improve the approval process. So that $77,000 right there includes a lot of these type of charges that you are approving right now.
Okay.
All right, so can I get a motion relative to this ARPA request from the Board of Health in the amount of $8,832.20?
Motion to approve this Board of Health ARPA request in the amount of $8,832.20.
I second that.
All right, I've got a motion and a second. I'll take a roll call vote. Mark Albers,
Aye.
Peter Galatano,
Aye.
Dan Sickle,
Aye.
Natalie Weir,
Aye.
Wasim Basili,
Aye.
Jane Matarazzo,
Aye.
Brendan Daly. Was that an aye? I didn't.
Yes.
Stephen Leahy,
Aye.
and I'm also an aye. So it passes 9-0. Okay. Next up, we have the Council on Aging, and I do believe Sue Kelleher is here. So this is for weekly meal delivery in the amount of $1,446.45. Sue, go ahead.
Yep. So in the beginning of COVID, we were delivering, we started at 3 meals a week, and then we went down to a grab and go system and a home delivery system. And as the pandemic progressed, we weren't eligible for the the original COVID funds. We had cut back substantially who we were delivering to. And then we found out that the meals that we delivered would be covered under the ARPA funds. So we just recently stopped delivering meals to the last 10 people that we would deliver to on a weekly basis. So these food bills, this particular period, we were delivering. We started with 20 people and then we weaned down to 10, and now we're complete with those. Any
Great.
questions?
I've got nothing. Does anybody have any questions?
None.
This seems pretty straightforward. Great. Can I get a motion relative to the ARPA fund request from the Council on Aging in the amount of $1,446.45?
So moved.
Second,
Sorry, can you say whether you move to approve or not approve?
Sorry, my bad. So I motion to approve this request for ARPA funds on behalf of Council on Aging in the amount of $1,446.45.
second,
All right. Roll call vote. Mark Albers,
Aye.
Peter Galatano,
aye.
Dan Sickle,
Aye.
Natalie Weir. I saw an eye there. Wasim Basili,
Aye.
Jane Matarazzo,
Aye.
Steve Leahy,
Aye.
Brendan Daly,
Aye.
and I'm also an aye. So that
Thank
one
you.
passes. Thank you, Sue. All right, next up, we have the select board. I presume Diane, you'll be taking this one. Zoom charges in the amount of $1,019.55.
Yes, Stephen, these charges are for the various licenses to allow the boards and committees to actually hold Zoom meetings. And we keep getting, more and more requests to do it, and sometimes we're shuffling accounts around to try and keep the price down, but this is what it's costing right now.
Great.
Maybe once we get back to going into meeting all together at the town hall and various other locations, maybe the Zoom request will come down.
Hey, Diane, Steve Leahy here. That was just my one question. So for this funding for Zoom, is this forward-looking or monies we owed in the past, or these are subscriptions, or you guys ask how the money spent with Zoom?
This is from the first quarter. The bill comes in once a month, and it's usually around $350, around that much for the different licenses. And I think going forward, with the way things are with COVID right now, I think we're going to continue with the Zoom. The select board has not decided yet to go back to having meetings in person. And I think even the Board of Health, is Daryl still on? She's not.
I believe she left.
Yeah, they are saying you can meet in person, but they are recommending that if you can still continue with Zoom, that right now, the way COVID is behaving, that's the better. And as you can probably see, you have probably a lot more people coming to your meetings now. I mean, the select board meetings, we're getting 47, 57, 60 people sometimes at our Zoom meetings. So participation has been really increased with the Zoom.
So I would caution the select board and all budget makers for these costs that may be reimbursed. Yes, let's get reimbursed. But if it is baked into the cost to run town meetings now into the future, we want to make sure that when we budget, we continue to budget for that. So that will be an expense increase going forward.
Right.
We're lucky we get this reimbursement now, and we'll take it if we so choose. But it seems to be not just an episodic expense, but something that would be baked into the budget.
And
let's hope we can go back to the way things were.
To follow that up real quick, Peter, good point. Diane, so is this the single Zoom account, like Zoom budget, that we're getting, the town's getting, or are there other Zoom costs that the individual departments are paying on their own, or is it all centralized?
No, it all comes under this. They call and they ask for a Zoom account, they go through David. He's the administrator of the account. And he will, you know, sign them up. We even have Jeannie doing meetings at nighttime for other boards and committees so that we can try and keep the cost down. She will open up the meeting, allow everybody in, and then close the meeting at the end for them.
And
So we are trying to keep the cost down.
the COA has their own, pays for their own Zoom account because we have so many lifetime learning meetings and so many other meetings that we just decided it came out of our budget.
Right, but I think you are the only one, Sue, that does that.
Yeah.
Wait, so then Sue, will you be coming to us with a separate ARPA fund request for the COA's Zoom account?
No, we haven't. We've just covered it under our budget.
Okay. And it's certainly, I think, something to keep in mind that moving forward, even after COVID restrictions, the select board, the town in general, may choose to continue forward with some sort of a hybrid meeting
Right.
solution for, you know, certainly the larger things like the select board meetings. So I would anticipate that in some way, shape, or form, there's going to be a Zoom or similar subscription in perpetuity. So I think the ARPA funding closes in like end of 2024 or something like that. So theoretically, we could keep on stretching out the ARPA funding for that, but I think that certainly by FY25, this would be something that needs to just go into the operating budget.
You're right. You're right about that.
Do we make any attempt to, you know, keep track of the various accounts that we have and see which ones are being used? You know, is there a calendar so that we make most efficient use of the accounts that we do have?
I have to say that David's in charge of all those accounts, and I'm sure that he doesn't hand them out lightly. So I'm sure he could probably name all the accounts. I don't handle that part of the Zoom, the accounts. He does that all himself. He's the administrator of that account. We can get you the list of the boards and committees that have a Zoom account if you would like.
No, it was more just, I'm asking the question more so that, for example, if the Council on Aging has a separate, you know, a separate account, but doesn't need it at all times, can another town committee use that account at a time, you know, since they're all town accounts? I'm just wondering if there's, you know, a central repository where we can make sure we're using the least number of total accounts.
Right. Well, I will tell you that the Traffic Safety Committee was looking for a Zoom link. And at the time, we didn't really have anything that was vacant, so we gave them mine. And then David kind of moved some people around and gave me back a Zoom account so that I could, you know, hold some meetings. So we are moving things around. It's a moving target with the accounts. But he does move people around.
All right. Any other questions or comments about the Zoom accounts?
What's the expression? Dollar foolish or something? What is? But here's like an example of, like, if someone is actually spending time at night to like turn on a Zoom account or turn it off. I mean, I question the productivity gain of you know, of saving a little bit on a few extra Zoom accounts and just making the life of and the productivity of the you know, the folks in town easier. I just don't see this as a good use of as a good saving, right? I mean, if we're saving a few dollars on this tool that is really a good tool for productivity, and on the other hand, making people just, you know, shuffle accounts, I just don't see that as a you know, that's not a savings in my mind. Right?
Or alternatively, you know, could it be, I agree with you, Wasim, and, you know, is it possible that this could be made self-service so that, you know, department heads could know that, you know, these are the accounts that the town has available, and just see for themselves which ones are available at the time they're trying to have a meeting. You know, if that would save time, for David or others.
I could talk to David about it and have him get back to you, Jane.
Okay, that sounds good. All right, so I'm going to move this one for a vote. I'll make this easier. Can I get a motion to approve the request for ARPA funds from the select board in the amount of $1,019.55?
So
So
moved.
moved.
Second.
All right, we'll do a roll call vote. Mark Alders,
Aye.
Peter Galatano,
Aye.
Dan Sickle,
Aye.
Natalie Weir,
Aye.
Wasim Basili,
Aye.
Jane Matarazzo,
Aye.
Steve Leahy,
Aye.
Brenda Daly.
Aye.
I'm also an aye. All right, that one passes 9-0. All right, next we have from the Finance Department at Seafring, consultant fees in the amount of $826.88.
Yes, this is looking for reimbursement for Clifton Larson Allen, who is the consultant we use for any questions I have regarding the ARPA expenditures. And the total bill for the July the 1st through September the 30th was $826.88. Of that, there's probably about $500 of it was the last CARES reconciliation report that had to do with the money that we had received back in fiscal year 21. So that was the finalizing of that. And about 2 hours worth was for ARPA questions. So I foresee this number to go down going forward.
Great. And just to be clear, when we have these ARPA requests and you say you ran it by the consultant, this is the consultant?
Yes, her name is Hannah York, and she,
Great.
yeah. So what I normally do is just send her the request that I've received. And sometimes we have a phone call. Sometimes she just reviews it and she'll say, yeah, it's okay. Or she'll say, if it falls into this category, you should be using words, particular words that will make it easier when it comes time to filling out the reporting forms and things like that. So we don't have to double back and redo things.
Deb, I think I heard a knowledge transfer from the first few applications for this, and that we'll be able to wean ourselves off of the consultants' services, except in the cases for new, unique questions.
Right. For things like this, for the, public, the public health responses where their expenses we have already incurred, this will be like a no-brainer. But things like we had somebody submit a request for farm pond revenue loss. And, based on what I saw, I thought, well, that looks okay. She kind of, went through it and stuff like that. And when I gave it to Hannah, she was like, oh, no, you really have to be specific about the revenue loss. You need to do this, you have to do this kind of calculation, and, way more knowledgeable than I am in this. So I think it will depend on what kind of ARPA request we get going forward, how much time she'll have to spend with me.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions about the consultant fees? Right. Hearing none, can I get a motion to approve the ARPA fund request from the Finance Department in the amount of $826.88?
So moved.
Second.
Great. Roll call vote. Mark Alders,
Aye.
Peter Galatano,
Aye.
Dan Sickle,
Aye.
Natalie Weir,
Aye.
Wasim Basili,
Aye.
Jane Matarazzo,
Aye.
Steve Leahy. Is that
Aye.
an
Sorry
aye or
about
wait? Let's see, Brandon Daly.
Aye.
I'm also an aye. All right, so that passes. And yes, I believe that's the last one. Great, thank you. And I think I've updated this as I went along. So Deb, I'm just going to email this to you right now.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I did want to mention, like on that bottom of that summary sheet, I did include some possible requests that either people have asked me about or have been brought up, just to give you an idea of things that might be requested. I know at, the select board meetings, they keep talking about some big picture things, but I have not seen any of that. So everything I've been receiving has been questioned about, has been smaller dollar amounts. Just a FYI.
Great, thank you. I did notice one thing was the town hall internet improvement. Is that, do you know, was that like a relatively large project situation of having to rewire the building and, I don't know, build in webcams and things like that? Or is it more
No,
like
no,
just,
not really. It was Gino came in and he actually had been working with, I think, Holliston, and they had, like, they were talking about when we do have meetings about doing a kind of a hybrid where you can be in the room and also doing the Zoom with the camera and things like that. And Holliston found a pretty economical way of doing it. But he is actually, before he submits it to ARPA, he is filling out some grant request right now. So he's going to see if he can get it through a grant prior to submitting it through ARPA. So
Great.
I don't really know a dollar amount, but it wasn't like, it was definitely less than 40,000.
oh, wow, that's cheap. So, and do you know the Holliston thing, is that something they've already implemented and is in use?
From my impression from Gino is that it is.
Okay, so we know it works.
Yeah, that's true. Yes.
Great, okay.
Also ask, has anyone made an attempt to, because it's this round of funding can be used for pretty broad purposes, including infrastructure, all kinds of things that we might have a need for. And so I'm wondering, has anyone just kind of generally canvassed each of the department heads and said, do you have any projects that fall into these categories that we, might consider using ARPA funds for, so that we have an overall view of sort of the menu of things that we might want to spend the money on, rather than doing it, well, this request comes in, okay, fine. This request comes in, okay, fine. Very on a very tactical basis rather than a more strategic basis. Have we made that effort to get that information compiled?
Not any more than via email. And, I sent an email to all the department heads and boards and things like that. But, directly contacting them, I have not done that. And I'm not sure I don't believe anybody else has.
Yeah, I think so far, Jane, that basically it's the email went. Did you all get that email also when Deb sort of requested of all the department heads to think about things they might want to use ARPA funds for and then let us know? Because Deb did send that out, and I'm assuming that summary of possible future things on that sheet, Deb, that's kind of what you've got so far out of that fishing expedition.
That is it. I did get one other call today from the Tom Trainer from the Groundwater Committee. They're having a meeting tonight as well, and they are going to be requesting close to $16,000 to be spent on an intern to help them update their systems. So that will be coming as well.
Okay.
To Jane's point on the strategic aspect, is we should have a roadmap, stated a little differently, over the next 3 years, where there are viable or potential projects that consume the entire funds. That can always change. It's kind of like a budgeting, capital budgeting or grant budgeting. and look further beyond just the immediate needs. And again, that does take a strategic select board, town administrator type of view of where the town is going and maximize the use and of all of these funds available.
Yeah, I guess what I would say, Peter, is that I think, I think we've discussed this, right, in our committee, and I think on the basis of that, Deb sent out that sort of canvassing email to kind of get input from department heads. I know that the select board is aware of our recommendation that they do such a thing, so that it isn't just a first come, first serve. And what we have so far is, kind of some bare bones stuff. My assumption would be that people don't have either the time or enough of a future plan to know about what sorts of projects they might have and to have a ballpark estimate. Because I would assume, a lot of the departments, the bigger departments, already have a capital plan or are working on a capital plan, but this seems like something that would fall outside of the scope of that capital plan, right? So it's an extra lift for them, right? And then I think it does get to the point of, okay, well, at some point, somebody either from the select board or from the town administrator's office needs to go and just physically start talking to people one-on-one to get that information. And I guess what I would say is that I think certainly Deb and the town administrator and the select board are all aware of our desire to go about this strategically rather than by the seat of our pants.
That's encouraging. Thank you.
Just one more question along those lines. There is no, I believe there's quite a long time frame that these funds can be applied. So is there any rush? In other words, we're doing these approvals, whatever, month by month, but is there any reason why we can't just kind of collect the requests for some period of time until people really feel like they have had a chance to think it through and put in all the requests? And at that point, then we could make some decisions with more on the table. I don't think there's any rush. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's any rush to say, okay, this is what we're going to spend the money on. I think we have time on this.
There really is no rush. I mean, everything that you reviewed this evening was basically things that are in the operating budget right now. And I had decided to have you review these quarterly so that the operating budget isn't skewed. So, I mean, and this is small potatoes, but, I think some of the other departments are really thinking, well, we have this money and we need this help. So this is our opportunity to use it. So you're right, there's no big overall strategy. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know if somebody, needs to be appointed to be in charge and take the lead in this, or where to go from here, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a good answer to it, because nobody's done this before. Hopefully nobody is going to have to do this again in the future. So we're kind of making it up as we go along. And I think as long as we are all keeping in mind the idea of having a larger strategy to the use of the funds, I think that's the best that we can hope for at the moment. And it's true, there is not a huge rush to use everything up right now because it is, I'm pretty sure it's the end of calendar year 2024. I've heard Jeff Waldron say a few times 2025. But I'm pretty sure that it was we have 3 years to use it after the ARPA funding was released.
Yeah, you're correct. It is the end of 2024.
Yeah. So again, I mean, it's not far in the future, but we have 2 years, basically. We have 2 years to use it up. and we've already used a quarter of it up, basically. All right. Any other discussion on ARPA before we move on to guidance discussion?
Just one final thought, Steve, along those lines is that we may maximize the use of these funds by offsetting a one-time large expenditure versus maybe absorbing, smaller things that can be absorbed into the budget, like the Council on Aging is doing with their Zoom account. They adapted to that incremental cost by absorbing it and not seeking the funds. If we needed to build something big and it fell into this category, I'd want to have collectively the town decide that that's a priority over these smaller projects that qualify and just come up because someone asked.
Yeah, well, one thing I can certainly tell you, I think just based on the last select board meeting, is that I don't remember how many people felt this way, but probably a majority of the board did feel like they didn't want to just be coming up with random large projects to spend the money on just so that they spent the money. I think that one of the things that they are thinking about is contingent on whether any of the state grant money comes through for the Pine Hill Lane project, that they might want to actually just put a very large chunk of the ARPA money towards the Pine Hill Lane project. On the assumption of, look, we already have this huge thing that it was needed, it was already done, and it's already been paid for. Rather than spending $500,000 on something that we maybe don't necessarily need just so that it fits under the ARPA categories, why don't we just put it towards this thing that we already did that qualifies?
Stephen, I'm just going to speak to that for just a minute. I did run that briefly by Hannah, and she didn't know all the details. She said, I'm not really quite sure how that is COVID related. And so she thought it was going to be a hard sell to be doing something like that, because this money is really intended to be used for expenses incurred because of COVID or an improvement and things like that, not necessarily because we needed a new road. I mean, again, she said it's not out of the question, but it would be a hard sell.
By that logic, though, Deb, I think the Leland Farm water supply is also not COVID related, right?
Well, they like, when you look at the guidelines, it has a lot about water infrastructure. And so, I really can't speak to it. I'm just repeating what she said.
Maybe a downtown water system could be a big project to use it for.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think a downtown water system, I think the estimate is around 3 million. 4 million apparently. Yeah. So it's unfortunately way bigger than this.
The encouraging point of this discussion is that someone is the board, select board, is prioritizing or attempting to prioritize the use of these funds so that we can again offset one-time costs in the future. And there may be 3 misses and 1 hit each time around, but at least the process of evaluating is forming.
Yeah, no, I think the select board, they at least, I don't know if they have a strategy, but they want to have a strategy. So that's the first step, right? They're cleanly aware of not wanting to just fritter it all away. So
yeah, I did receive an email this afternoon from Eric, and his question was, how much of these expenses are expenses we would incur anyway, and how much of the expenses are truly above and beyond what we would normally incur. So he wants to have a discussion with David and myself regarding that. So, you know, we didn't pick a time, but that's down the road.
All right, any more ARPA discussion before moving on to guidance? All right, hearing none, we will move on to fiscal year 23 guidance. And I believe Wendy Alassi has been clamoring to give us some new growth and utility value numbers. So Wendy, you can have the floor if you'd like.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, Wendy Alassi, Director of Assessing. Late this afternoon, I received our NSTAR utility valuation. They were projected to increase on an average of between 40 and 50%. I'm not sure if you recall, it was mandated by the state that we hire a consultant and we have them do a blended net book, blended replacement cost, new less depreciation value for NSTAR electric and gas. So the results are in, and for electric, the value increased by 69%.
Ooh.
Yeah, so there's a difference. So last year it was 17,095,000. The growth for this year is 11,807,000 with an overall value of, I'm just rounding it to 29 million. So it went from 17 million to 29 million for electric.
Now, Wendy,
Yes.
doesn't this have, this is a golden handcuff thing? That
It is. I'm getting to that.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got it all calculated out. So the the gas increased. It was a 75% increase. Last year's value was 2 million. The difference of growth for this year is 1.5 million for a total of 3.5 million. So, which leads me to Peter. We were talking, he was saying about the golden handcuffs. So the growth number for just the utilities in revenue is $262,093. In addition to that, we have 25 million approximately for real estate new growth, which is 490,750. So a total new growth number for fiscal 22 is 752,843. However, because the statute states that for a personal property tax bill under appeal, which they're going to appeal, NSTAR is appealing all of these tax bills, they only have to pay 50%, 50, of their tax bill, which in essence,
Of their previous tax bill, right?
Of their starting January 1. So they're going to receive a tax bill January 1 with these new numbers.
Oh, okay, so 50% of the new valuation.
Yes, which means that there'll be an unpaid revenue of 318,676, which essentially brings the new growth number back down to 434,167, because that money it's going to be tied up. So last year they paid, let me see here, the revenue for last year was 335,583. for electric. The revenue for this year for electric, even with the increase, will only be 283,679. And then the gas, last year's revenue was 39,000. This year with the increase, it should be 69,000, but 50% of that is a revenue of 34,997. So, you know, it's great. I mean, I'm even happy with the 434, but we somehow have to build into the budget that we're going to, you know, we're going to have to make up for that 318 somewhere, somehow. And I don't know, we've talked about it. I don't know how you guys will do that, but I, you know, just to let you know. So it's good news and it's bad news.
But
Well,
now
the
for the
net-
purpose of calculating tax rate, is new growth, the new growth number that's being used, is it the new valuation or is it the 50% of that?
No, I mean, this is the thing. So I'm going to have to, I have to submit those documents to the Department of Revenue, and they have to match dollar for dollar in order to get certified. So that's you know, overall, the 752,843 has to be in our recap. So we're going to have this like artificially lower tax rate. So we somehow, I don't know how you guys want
But
to.
it's not really artificially low, right? Unless NSTAR wins the appeal, right?
Well, yes. Okay. Yes. So
And that may
what
take
will
years, but still, it's like
exactly. So
the
we
number
will,
that you're using to calculate is accurate. It's unless NSTAR wins an appeal.
you're absolutely correct.
Right. So
But
then the
problem
issue really is just the actual revenue stream, right? The
right.
revenue
We're going to be
stream,
light.
right?
318
Right.
grand. Yeah.
But also the schools have given us more than that, haven't they?
Well, let me separate that because I don't think Wendy can speak to the schools. When it comes to the new growth, in our models, and what we'll use is the net new growth separated from the reserve for the litigation and appeals, so that we only spend what we know from a cash basis that we'll be getting next fiscal year. So if half the new growth of the utilities is tied up in appeals, there's an offset, I think, to that, whether it hits that offset or not. But what we can plan on is that lower number of new growth that does not include the 50% appealable valuation to the utilities, if that makes sense. The tax rate, I don't care about. That's a state function, and they'll figure it out how to do the tax rate. From a budgeting perspective, we just know that half of that new growth is going to be dragged out in tax purgatory.
Correct. And what I've been hearing is that, and again, it even makes me nervous to even say it. It seems as though the towns will win at the appellate tax board level. But again, I went through this with Verizon years, I don't know, 7 years ago, and then we ended up having to give the money back, and it created a lot of issues for a lot of communities. The community I was in held it, and so it did not impact us negatively. So it's,
Right, Deb, this is a question. Don't we have a reserve account for rebates and appeals on the books that we fund?
yep. So we have an overlay account, and the overlay account is about 150,000. It was 142,000 for fiscal 21, and I think it's about 150,000. So the other thing we could do is increase our overlay to $468,000.
Because that would be the offset to that revenue
Yeah.
perceived in that
Yeah.
overlay account and carry
Yeah.
it forward so that it balances.
Yeah, so I can talk to my rep and I can ask. I mean, I don't know, you guys will have to talk amongst yourselves, so the typical overlay.
Is there a drawback to doing that, to ballooning your overlay?
No, because what we can do is if we are successful, what we can do is the Board of Assessors has to get a formal request from the select board, and we can do what's called an overlay release. And it's a matter of the Board of Assessors voting to release the overage, which will be, it could be 600,000, 300, whatever it is. The overage would release and it will go back into, I believe, the general fund.
Right, so Steve, I think it's proper accounting that and the mechanism is there within municipal accounting, is any
potential litigation, we have
Yes.
to account for that, yes.
Right, and we throw the money that we think we could have got new growth into that pot, which lowers our new growth, but sets aside a reserve or an overlay for any outcome. And it may be 100% favorable to us and we get the money back as
Right.
Wendy just outlined, or there's an in-between settlement where they do get an abatement and therefore we don't get that new growth, but we didn't see it yet. And then the true new growth after the settlement will hit the general fund. So I think from an accounting wise, the state and the government accounting will take care of this. As I mentioned in our model, we just want to have that net cash value that we know we can spend versus the money tied up going forward.
Okay, so why don't I talk to my DOR rep, and Deb, I think you're still on.
I am.
Maybe you could reach out to the Bureau of Local Assessment and ask Amy if that's okay. And so I'll get an answer from the Division of Local Services. You can get an answer from the Bureau of Local Accounts. And if we are allowed to do that, then I think that would be the route to take.
Agreed.
And we can just let you guys know at the next meeting. That sound like a plan?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, just the two important aspects are that, one, the amount of actual new growth revenue that we see. I do want to make sure that in our planning and in our budget models that is correct, but also I want to make sure that we aren't losing track of the amount that is being appealed, but will actually go into the calculation of the tax rate. Because I mean, I do care about the tax rate. I know, Peter, you're like, I don't care
Yes,
about the tax rate. I'm like, that's really all we really care about. And
that's
so
that's what I live and breathe for. Everything I do
yes,
leads to that number.
yeah.
Yeah.
So like as we're working on our budget, I tend to want to see with each new iteration of the budget model what the calculated tax rate is. So I want to make sure that therefore that however 300K that's in the overlay is actually still incorporated into that calculation so that we see what the rate is.
Okay.
So I just want to make sure that those things are still true as we move
Mhm.
forward.
Yep. And one other thing I need to point out, because I see that your next topic is the 23 budget. Every building is all new. Everything in Southfield, 59 North Main is it's done. It's in, all the growth was in 21 and 22. So there will be no growth from that. So the new growth number will go back down to probably about 150,000.
Okay. But it was
That
for 22, what was it?
for 22, it's 752,843.
Okay.
But we're going to do less the unpaid revenue from the
Yeah.
utilities, so 434,167. I don't like to count my chickens before they hatch, but I believe within the next 12 months, there's a property that's going to be coming out of deferral. And last I knew, with interest, it was going to be about $220,000 that will be being returned back to the town. So that will help as well.
Okay.
Wendy, is just a quick thing on the
Sure.
litigation with NSTAR. Is there any sense, word on the street, for how long that litigation is likely to take before it gets to a resolution? Is this a matter of many years or a matter of some number of months?
No, it's not months. I spoke earlier about Verizon. I believe that took 5 years, 4.5 years. However, there's kind of a different regime at the appellate tax board. So I think that they're trying to expedite things. So I'm hoping, 24 to 36 months. That's what my hope is.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Yep.
So Wendy, follow up to that, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I don't know if you said this or I'm just mixing different topics, but I thought we did an assessment, we gave a number, and then the next step is they bring their own assessors and they come back with a number. Was that a different topic? That's not this?
No, I don't believe that was this topic.
Okay.
Well, so I think what you're thinking of is, in the past, prior to the state mandate, NSTAR did their own form of valuation. They submitted it to the state, they submitted it to the assessor, and those were the numbers that we had to use. It was being challenged because it's low. And so the state approved for the blended replacement cost, new, less depreciation, blended value, blended with the net book value. And that's how they're coming out with the new values. So, I mean, it was recommended by the state. So to say we're going to lose on a state level is doubtful, but I've seen stranger things happen with the ATB. So
thanks.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, in the model we use, we're going to have a pickup. This is the budget model that we use from 2022, because the new growth was only, from memory, 250,000. That's revised upward which flows into 2023. Then there is the utility net, which would have another positive increase. That's in 2022 also. But then I heard you say, Wendy, that 2023 will only have about 100,000 of new growth at the low end. And
100,
so,
yeah, 100 to 150, which is the norm.
okay. And
Yeah.
so, Deb, what we'll see when you revise the model is that the assessed values will go up, and then as the formula calculates the taxable amount, we'll realize that in our budget model for 2023. So even though the new growth is only 100,000 for 2023, I believe the way it works is that we'll have the benefit of that residual new growth from 2022 flow into 2023. And I could be wrong, but
There's no residual growth. There will be no.
No, that's I made that term up, Wendy.
Okay.
There's no defined term.
Okay, I'm
it's-
not following you. Sorry.
well,
I'm following you.
It's more for the advisory board and for Deb in our model.
Yeah.
Is that
Okay.
we pegged a number of new growth last year. It is higher this year. And so that should flow through our preliminary model to give us the true value of known assessments in 2022 for 2023. And then the unknown is what you just gave us of about 100,000 of new growth. Especially if the overlay is factored into. So
Correct.
I think it all works out in the wash. And Steve, I am concerned about the tax rate, but the government accounting standards takes care of that for us.
Yes.
We don't really have to worry about that on how it's
Right.
calculated. We just have to-
Internally, we have to, right? Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's all a net positive. Is more growth coming from 2022 into 2023, and then additional projected new growth in 2023.
Yeah, I mean, so it essentially, I think that, the tax rate is going to be lower than we anticipated because of all of this new growth. And that is going to carry through to next year, but there will be sort of a normal, modest amount of new growth on top of that.
And then we'll have to still increase the overlay by the
Yes.
Yes, by the
Right.
320.
Right. But I do want to make sure that we do in our budget model where we are calculating the tax rate, that we are incorporating the overlay into it.
Yeah. Okay. So
does that make sense?
Yes. How does this sound to advisory? So Deb and I had talked at length about doing some the forecasting, and within the forecasting models, it goes 5 years ahead. So in those forecasting models, I'll be sure to give Deb the $470,000 overlay number every year. And then that will help her with forecasting going forward.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. That would be very helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what's the rationale behind including that overlay number in the tax calculation? Again, what if the negative outcome happens, and so I'd rather just, what's the expression, someone said it, not count the chickens before they hatch, right?
Yes.
Wasim, that's a great question. It's a conservative approach. The overlay reduces the new growth to the maximum amount of losing the appeal. And so if the worst case scenario happens, and Wendy, correct me if I'm wrong, Deb, correct me if I'm wrong. If we lose all the appeals, the overlay covers that.
Yes.
If we win, it's a windfall. And so we get new revenue to spend or reduced tax rate because I forget the tax rate calculation, but it's assessed value divided.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
So we're taking a conservative approach with the overlay, assuming that the appeals or the abatement process is upheld, and we have to reset the value to 50% of what it was.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, Peter, what we're saying is that when we say in our calculations, instead of saying that the tax rate is 19, let's say $19 per thousand, we're going to say it's 1950. We're going to ignore that overlay account for that. Is that what you're saying? That's what we're going to do?
Yes on the math, no on the semantics. We're not ignoring it, we're incorporating it because it's actually reducing taxable assessed value. So it does get that higher tax rate, assuming that they win, but then when it's adjudicated in the tax courts, we can true up that number to either release it or to honor it and then maintain that higher tax rate, if I'm explaining myself.
But I think the key is actually, I want to make sure if the actual tax rate is going to be 19, I want our budget model to show us that the calculated tax rate is 19. So to me, that's like, I understand that there's a large amount of money that's being appealed, but I don't want our picture of what is the tax rate actually going to be when people get their tax bills next year. I don't want to be off by 25, 30, 40 cents.
And we won't be.
Right. I want our calculation to be accurate. Fully understand. And this is, I think, the thing that gives Wendy heartburn, right, is the fact that the tax rate is being calculated off of the assessed value. The non-appealed, the new 69 to 75% higher value. The tax rate is being calculated off of that. However, because it's being appealed, the actual tax revenue is not going to be that much. In fact, it's going to be off by $350,000. And I think that's what Wendy is trying to make sure, is that we aren't counting on that $350,000 in revenue because it's not coming in. It's being set aside, even if we'll be getting it 3 years from now. And so I want to make sure that, yes, we keep in mind the fact that this $350,000 is not in our wallet and we can't spend it, but it does technically belong to us until a judge tells us that it doesn't. And therefore, I want to make sure that our accounting shows that this is our money and our tax rate is based on the fact that this is our money.
So again, is it only the number, the tax rate? I mean, because if we don't have access to this money, and if we tax at, let's say, I'm using the same numbers, 19.5 versus 19, if we only tax 19, are we going to have the cash, right? Because this could go for what, 2-3 years, right? That's what Wendy, you said, this could go on for 2-3 years. I mean, if we are taxing for 2-3 years at $19 instead of $19.50 or whatever the number is, that's a big difference.
Yep.
Right. So what's the value of just seeing the number 19? I would rather actually, tax at the rate that we need, to.
We will be.
But,
yes.
Yeah. But we don't
will. So
control our tax rate, right? It's like Peter said, the state is going to determine what the tax rate is. We can't say, you know what, we're not going to account for this $350,000, and so therefore we're going to make our tax rate higher. We don't have control over that, right? And so that's why I want to know as close, as accurately as possible what the real tax rate is going to be. Now, we as advisory, as we're looking at all the budgets, have to keep in mind the fact that, okay, this tax rate that we see on the budget model version 7 that Deb's going to give us in 6 months, we have to understand that that calculated tax rate is artificially low because of the fact that $350,000 of revenue is actually going into the overlay. So we have to keep that in mind, but I don't want to just knowingly have our tax rate be the calculated tax rate that we're looking at be totally off, right?
right. So by adding it
makes
to the
sense?
overlay, I believe that we will have to raise and appropriate. So we'll raise the,
Got it. Okay. So we're
and
still need
raise
to
that
raise
and then put
appropriate
it,
money for the overlay.
yes, and then we will put it in the overlay account. And again, if we are successful and it turns in our favor, the select board and maybe advisory and the select board request from me to release it. We go through that exercise of releasing the amount, and it goes back to, I think, the general fund. I'm not sure, Deb or would know where it would go back to, any overage. So it will be covered. And I just want everybody to understand that we're talking about fiscal 22, where right now what we're talking about is the growth numbers for fiscal 22. And we're talking about what we're going to be doing this year. And then next year, or until this is resolved, we will continue to raise that overlay money and put it to the side. That's all. So we will have it. So it will be incorporated in the rate.
So Wendy, just to follow up on that, and
Sure.
apologies if this was already described and I didn't.
No,
quite
it's hard to
follow.
understand. Yeah.
How will the state calculate our tax rate? How will they account for the fact that there's this litigation? What will they do with the rate that they actually set for us?
So they don't necessarily set our rate. We have a database called Gateway, and we enter in, the finance team, enter in all of our money, our levy, everything gets entered into this database.
Of course.
And it calculates the rate. We can't go over 25. That's where the state will step in.
And so in that calculation, how will the overlay account be handled in that calculation?
So the overlay, there is an overlay document that is filled out by myself and the finance director. And we will increase the overlay amount that we want to hold. Essentially, an overlay is like it's in a holding pattern. So instead of 150,000, the finance director will enter in 470,000.
Right.
Or yeah. So we're basically increasing our overlay by a significant amount. So that money is accounted for. For example, just to give you an idea of what comes out of the overlay: personal property abatements, real estate abatements, senior exemptions, veterans exemptions, things like that. That comes out of the overlay.
And so then at the end of the day, when there's a tax rate calculation done through that process,
Yes,
Is that tax rate calculation implicitly assuming that the town has received the 350,000 that's being litigated, or that the town has not received the 350,000 that's being litigated?
it is that we have received it. It's going to be built, yes, it's going to look.
So we would have to
as
make sure we have that money, right? But I think
Right.
that's, we as advisory can make a decision. Okay, like we could actually increase the real tax rate by simply levying that amount, right?
Mhm,
Or we could choose to draw that amount from free cash, right?
Yeah,
And
okay.
then
mhm.
it would not be levied. And then, so, I mean, that might be a question for Heidi to go to the auditors and to S&P about it, because I know that it's like using free cash to decrease the tax rate is not something they want us to do, right? And if we said, all right, well, let's take 350,000 of free cash and punt that into the overlay because this is a placeholder for this money that we think we're going to get, is that okay? Because that's what I would want to do, especially since the schools just gave us approximately that amount, right?
Right, yeah,
So that's what I would want to do, is say, all right, well, let's take this chunk of free cash that we didn't anticipate and let's just put it over here into the overlay for this money that
Mhm.
we do anticipate, but we don't have yet. So to me, that's like a nice one-to-one shift. We don't have to actually levy it, right?
Right.
And the tax rate, I mean, it is artificially low, but it won't be artificially low once we win the case, right? So, which we hope. But in the meantime, I want the town's actual tax rate to be what the tax rate should be according to the state's sort of guidelines,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
And so if it's supposed to be 25, 30 cents lower because of this revaluation, then I want it to be 25 to 30 cents lower, right? That's our goal. We want to get the tax rate down. And this is not a cheating way of getting it down. I think it's a legitimate way to get it down.
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely.
So we should not
And
pretend that it's not going down by 25 to 30 cents. We should want to bring it down. That's our goal.
Right. And Deb, what we should do is use that consultant, Hannah, and Hannah would answer those questions for us. And then if Heidi wanted to speak with Standard & Poor to see if it would reflect poorly on us, that's kind of a separate issue.
Now Hannah's the COVID consultant, isn't she?
She's really just a true accountant consultant. I use her too when I have questions regarding any of the, accounting questions and things like that. So she does both.
Right.
Yeah, and she's a municipal.
We a lot of ideas are going back and forth. This isn't new to municipal accounting.
Right.
And so it's all factored in, and think of it as a balance sheet account truing up to either create additional expense or lowered expense, which is EBITDA to the bottom line. And that's all we're doing now. And so there's mechanisms in place that have been doing this for 350 years, or at least since the Pilgrims landed here. And so I believe it's going to be taken care of. So as the funds flow, it should all populate our model to be precise and as accurate as the accounting is. So I'm confident that will happen.
Thanks, that was super helpful.
All right. Any other questions for Wendy before?
Well, I have
move on
another
to our-
question. I have
Oh, go
another
ahead.
question for you as
Yep.
we're talking this through. If they're only paying 50% of their revenue, there wouldn't be anything to give back. Correct?
Can I ask you a question, Wendy? Because tell me if the following is correct. I think I heard you say that about 12.5 or 13 million in additional valuation will necessarily go into the calculations, correct?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay, but the yield on that, if you will, the revenue associated with that should be 752, but in fact is only going to be it's going to be 318 less than that because they only have to pay 50%, correct?
Mhm.
So that means that when we look at the assessed values, on first glance, it's going to look like we should be getting $318,000 more than we're actually going to get. And isn't that the reason why we have to increase the overlay by the 318? Because we have to find a way to account for, to Peter's point, to account for the fact that even though the assessment numbers say you're going to get an extra 318, you're actually not going to get it. So we have to find another way to eat that up, if you will, and we're going to do that by adding it to the overlay. Is that correct?
Right prior to what you said, I'm just having this moment, and that's why we're having this discussion. So just hear me out for a second. So they are only going to be paying us half, correct?
Right.
So if we lose, there's nothing to refund. They would actually owe us a little bit of money. Does that make sense to you?
It's a
Yes.
timing, Wendy. It's a timing because you're saying losing is in the future. Currently, we're closing out 2022 and projecting 2023. That winning or losing is way out there. So we have to create these reserves. And I think you're mixing together current cash flows, future cash flows based upon a decision. And I would let it rest where we're at now, because the government accounting standards will take care of that and calculate
it.
everything
Okay.
true and accurate. And when
Yep.
there is an adjudication, we'll have a reserve to offset that revenue. And I don't want to even get into that detail because that's in the
No.
future. Who knows what
Yeah.
will happen in the future.
Right. Okay. All right. I'm going on mute. Thank you for your time. I didn't
Thank
expect
you.
it to get this detailed. I apologize.
That's
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, clear as mud.
Mhm.
All right, so that brings us to guidance. I had said I was going to try to have a draft of the guidance letter. I obviously do not have one because life happens. But I mean, I guess it's good to know all that whole discussion that we had in terms of the new growth. I mean, I think it's at the end of the day, it is good, right, that we have a lot of new growth, more than we had anticipated this year. And I believe that where we had left it after our last meeting is that I think we were basically leaning towards going back to the old tried and true, essentially level funding plus 2% COLA, right? Is that,
Did
can
Fiscal
anyone?
already decide 2%? Do we know that?
We do not know that. I think I was just using that as a standard just because that's what it's been, I think, each of the last 3 years. I haven't actually looked if the CPI has been dramatically different from that over the past year.
It has. CPI is
It
up to
has.
about 5.4%.
Yeah, it
So
depending on the exact time period, but it's been running well above 2%, as Peter said.
Yeah.
And I would note that though in previous years we have been doing a 2% COLA, the actual CPI back in those previous years was less than 2%, not by much, but a little bit.
Yep.
Do we know, this might be where we're losing our institutional knowledge here, but do we know historically the personnel board, how closely have they matched to the CPI when they decide their annual COLA?
I know when Fred was running the board, he would peg it off of Social Security. So the Social Security increases year over year, which is a reflection from those government economists, was a proxy for what the personnel board would recommend.
And the Social Security increase will be based on a September to September increase in not the main CPI that we all look at, but one that's called the CPIW, which specifically is meant to track changes in the cost of living of wage earners. And the Social Security increase that people will get next January will be based on what the year over year changes at the end of September.
So do we know when that number is going to come out?
That will come out soon, mid-October. That'll be out and within a couple of weeks.
Okay. So would it be reasonable, do you think, that we should anticipate something closer to 5% for COLA?
I don't know what that number is going to be. My guess is it'll be somewhat less than 5, but it's going to be way above.
Higher than 2.
It's going to be way above
2. Yeah. Okay. All right. So COLA will be basically what COLA is, based on the personnel board's recommendation. Union employees will just go by whatever their collective bargaining agreement is. And then for operating expenses, I think we had gone back to basically deciding that the mechanism of trying to give sort of customized guidance for the larger departments was tricky, and maybe at the end of the day not as, I don't know, useful or fruitful as it could be. But I wanted to bring that back to discussion to see what everybody thinks after having had a month of either thinking about it or not thinking about it. And I admit that I have spent most of the month not thinking about it.
Steve, I like that. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Steve.
I was just going to add in that previously another methodology that had been used here was a rolling 3-year average of expenses. So each department's rolling 3-year average. I think whereas a number of us here were on the board at the time, that we chose not to continue using that because the actual amount spent on a year-to-year calendar year basis were swinging wildly. And it was determined that the 3-year rolling average actually wasn't a good representation of what the departments were spending on a year-to-year basis. Just do it again. The actual spending versus the budget amounts was just off regularly and significantly.
Yeah, and I think I emailed out to you like literally like 5 minutes before the meeting started. Essentially a Vadar report that Deb had given me, which was essentially that, right? It had a 3-year average for, I think, 2019, 2020, and 2021 actuals for all the departments. But I think it runs kind of into the same issue, right? Because 2020 and 2021 have been so anomalous that I'm not sure we can use those numbers as an accurate guide, as to what we should expect the departments to do in fiscal 23. Mostly as a matter of nobody thus far has accurately predicted the course of this pandemic, right? So I think it would be foolish for us to attempt to predict that. But I do know last year, maybe 2 years ago, I was a strong proponent of trying to tie the guidance to the rolling average, because it basically made most departments go down and some departments go up. But at the end of the day, we just decided to go with level funding again.
Steve, I'm trying to remember back to last month when we talked, but I thought that we were okay with level funding for almost every department, but then we were getting hung up on a couple of them, right? So schools was one, and then the other, which is like a whole, thing in of itself, but the other one was DPW, right?
Right.
Because our experience over the last couple of years has been that we tell Sean he's level funded, but then we've also got these other things out there that at some point we've wanted to take care with him and just be accurate and give him whatever the right amount of funds are to do whatever those things we want him to do are. So I don't know. I don't want to recreate the discussion we had last time, but I was thinking that there was going to be some way to have a caveat or a specific around those couple big departments. And I thought that's partly also why we went out and talked to some of the bigger ones, just to see if they were any others that were going to be needing a similar type of unique treatment. I'm not sure if we've identified any others, but those two seem like they are maybe not conducive to the just level funding.
My idea, if I can just chip in, is I like the zero trend or the level based, because once you exclude salaries, wages, and benefits, we haven't talked about benefits, but that's something that is told to us by the broker. But the salaries and wages are either fixed by our COLA for a small amount of people not on contract. The contracts are the contracts, so those could be anywhere from 0 to 10%, whatever it is. And what remains is only about 40% of the budget. And then you take the schools out of that and it's even less. If we take the approach and saving ink on the guidance letter by using a zero trend for those controllable expenses, you're challenging the departments, big and small, to really look and justify each line item. And some do it better than others. And yes, DPW and buildings are unique with their needs. But from a guidance perspective, it's pretty eloquent, straightforward, saying post-pandemic or post-initial phase pandemic, we're in phase 2 of the pandemic, we really have to look at all expenses critically based upon last year, and those are truing up as we speak, and have the department heads weigh in as to where they can or can't, because already we have the fire department that looks pretty steady Eddie. The police department has a new police chief, so he'll have to earn his wages and keep it flat. DPW and buildings, that's Sean, and we'll work with Sean. And then the school department, which seems to have a lot of money, so they should be able to work within guidance. So I think it's eloquent to keep it, at a zero trend for the non-salaries, wages, and benefits, and work with each department where there are exceptions.
I guess then the question is, part of the reason why I began the whole guidance thing a couple meetings ago with the fact that we can't do level funding again is because of essentially Sean having made a comment in one of our meetings that we can't tell him that he's got to be level funded and that he's got to bring his operating expenses out of capital, right? So in our guidance letter, do we need to acknowledge in some way the fact that that we have tasked the DPW director with altering the way that he does his budget?
We shouldn't rule by exception. So it should be a standard guidance for everyone. where there are exceptions, we'll deal with them on a case-by-case basis.
If we know that we're gonna have this shift in the way that we're gonna deal with the DPW budget, do we have to acknowledge that in a letter now?
No, my humble opinion is no.
Well, if that's the case, then can we just have a conversation with Sean? And we already publicly acknowledged to him at a meeting last spring that we were gonna to make this effort to move some of the capital stuff into operating. So it's already sort of out there, right?
It is. You're absolutely right, Mark. But with both buildings and the DPW, their runway for projects are so long. They cross over, and he admitted this. They cross over fiscal years, and it gets messy. And so, in it of itself, it's doesn't fit neatly into a fiscal year when he wants to do some road work, building work. And so it's DPW buildings will always be the exception.
I'm not arguing with you. I'm agreeing with you, Peter. If we can just say that we want level funding, then let's just do it. And then if we know, and some of the departments and Sean knows that we're going to work with them to get it the way that we think is most beneficial to our residents, then we'll just do it.
I guess the question, and I'll direct it at you, Peter, because I think you probably know that on-site insight report better than any of us, is do we have a sense of how much of the stuff that is encompassed by the on-site insight report should reasonably be reflected in the town building's operating budget as opposed to capital expense, right? Because I think that's mainly what has been bringing this up year after year, both in the capital budget committee and in advisory. And if I remember correctly, when we looked at it with Sean in last year's budget discussions, I think we came up with a number that was roughly somewhere in the $50,000 to $100,000 range annually for at least the next 3 years. From that on-site insight report was more operating type expense rather than capital. But I guess I am open to your thoughts about that whole situation, Peter, because I think you understand the on-site insight report better than any of us.
Steve, I'll answer that on 3 dimensions. Scientifically, absolutely. We know to the penny what should happen each year for each building based upon the report. From the art of management perspective, the lines blur a lot. The projects blur and carry over from one year to another based upon supply chain bottlenecks to vendor bottlenecks to contractor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where the art of working with Sean comes in to refine that. And then the common sense dimension is we have to marry both of those together to get to the budgeted piece of it. So we do have hard numbers. We have to evaluate what was accomplished or what other projects absorb some of those funds, because he could have budgeted for a new roof on Town Hall, but use that money to pave something else. And so you're swapping and switching depending upon what Sean and his diligence could do that year. And then pull it all together to get to our budget number. So there's a lot of flexibility in the on-site insight and managing those projects and running both buildings and DPH. So again, it's a long-winded way to say there's multiple answers to get to the right answer.
And if I may just layer onto that, and I don't want to overcomplicate it, but I do think this is complicated because Peter, that was enormously helpful that you broke everything down, you know, between capital and operating based on the $10,000 limit. But I think there's an additional complication there in that if you really look at the things that are now listed as being operating just by virtue of the fact that they are less than $10,000, nonetheless, many of those items really, I would say, are capital items. They're just less expensive capital items. So things like, you know, parking lot improvement or signage, you know, changing the signage. I mean, there are a lot of things that have a life, a useful life that would definitely qualify them as capital rather than operating. It's just that because they cost less than $10,000 and the way that Sherborn sort of thinks about things, they've been put into operating. So I think we would be making a big mistake if we just said, well, because, you know, there's $50,000 to $100,000 worth of stuff that is really more operating than capital because it's less than $10,000. Therefore, we need to increase the operating budget. I don't think so. I think it's much more nuanced than that because there's a lot of stuff that's less than $10,000 that's still capital.
But Jane, is there a limit that you would propose? I mean, at some point, it just becomes, you know, I mean, I don't know if the fact that something is capital, then you have to track it, depreciation. I mean, at some point, it just becomes kind of maybe too much work for the. Is there a lower cutoff that you would recommend, less than 10,000? Or?
Well, I can tell you what my suggested approach would be. I mean, my suggested approach would be to take what Peter did, which is a really nice breakdown based on the $10,000, but look at each of those items that are now listed as operating and say, okay, but is it really operating or is it capital? Because it's not that hard to, you know, to see the distinction there. Is it just, you know, less expensive capital or is it operating? It's pretty easy to sort that out, I think. And so I would recommend that the things that are less than $10,000, but still really capital, would be left out of this operating budget analysis. And so we would look at those things that we would all agree, yeah, they really are operating, not capital, if you do it right, you know, if you do it year by year by year. So for example, like landscaping, right? I mean, you know, you need to do a certain amount of new landscaping each year, and that's not really capital, but maybe his operating budget does need to be increased to factor that in. That's one example. So, you know, it's a little bit of work, but I think if we really wanted to do it right, we should look at the stuff that really is operating and then look at, you know, they're on different schedules, right? Sometimes it comes up every 5 years, sometimes it comes up every 10 years. And, you know, you'd spread it out if you want to give them a little bit each year, rather than just going, you know, big swings. Okay, this year he needs a lot more in his operating budget. This year he needs a lot less. And, you know, you'd sort of parcel that out over a 5-year period or a 10-year period.
The good thing here in talking about capital and operations is that the capital budget committee does do a fine job of screening all of the capital items so that there's 2 bites of the apple here. And we have the same report, the same on-site insight report, where we parse operation from capital in evaluating the capital. And so between both capital budget and advisory, we should be able to tease out those ambiguities of what is really operational on the on-site insight, what is capital on the on-site insight for that particular fiscal year. And again, I know I've mentioned to Sean in the past, well, just kind of consolidate certain types of projects and bid them out so that small $3,000 projects, 5 of them become 15 if you're carpeting, and capitalize that. Now, we may or may not be able to do that, but that's a place where it would either dwell in the operating budget, which is advisory, the capital budget, which is capital budget then flows into advisory. We have multiple sets of eyes looking at that, given the hard and fast parameters for capital, and then knowing what we can get done within the fiscal year and setting aside those dollars out of either pot. Because even the best laid plans go awry July 2nd because things happen on both sides, vendors, supply chains, and issues that I've mentioned before.
I mean, I guess my counterpoint, I guess, to what Jane, what you were saying is that I don't, and again, maybe Peter, you can answer this, but I don't know that it would be quite so easy to look at something and say, okay, this is less than 10,000, but in reality, it's capital, because I think with the on-site insight report, they excluded things that were consumables and sort of services, contractual services, things like landscaping, right? It was all things that were physical items associated with the building, right? But then we could, I mean, I don't know, as an example, it probably doesn't really apply, but let's just say light bulbs, right? So, I mean, an LED light bulb has a useful life now of what, 20 years, right? Does that make it a capital item? I don't think so, right? Like a toilet, right? A toilet might break and a replacement toilet is going to be a few $100s, right? But once you've put it in, the useful life of that toilet is going to be decades probably, right? And you could say, all right, well, let's replace all of the toilets and all of the bathrooms in all the town buildings, and that suddenly becomes a big capital project. But that's not an appropriate way to go about it, right? And I think that I'm guessing that you have items that are in all of the different strata of cost from $10 to $10,000. And so where do you draw the line, right? And I think historically this has been the issue, is that we've just lumped things together into these so-called capital projects, and then Sean has been using them as a sort of slush fund for replacing things year after year. And I think that's where the issue has come up in previous years, as the capital budget committee is looking at how this is being used. So I think that's the issue that we're trying to resolve here, right? Is, well, for those small things that, oh, look, it broke this year, we have to replace it. It only costs $500, but like I didn't budget $500 to replace this thing in my operating budget. So now what do I do? You know?
I agree with that, Steve, but what I'm saying is that if you, I think we all need to go back and look at that. What Peter did was very helpful, because I think when you look at that, you do realize that some of the stuff that is now, I mean, I think we have to keep in mind that the $10,000 limit is the only reason that is relevant is that that's the point at which capital budget has to review an expense. It doesn't mean that if something's more than $10,000, it's automatically capital, and if it's less than $10,000, it's automatically operating. That's just a construct that the town developed to determine when the capital budget committee needs to weigh in.
Well, also, Jane, if I can add, to float a bond for certain projects, there are parameters too.
Yeah.
So if we wanted to capitalize 24 flush toilets, that may not pass muster on the bond market with bond counsel.
I totally agree with that. And Steve, I also agree with what you were just saying. All I'm saying is that when you look at the on-site report, which is really dealing with capital assets, they're not dealing with light bulbs. They're dealing with how you maintain and take care of and replace your capital assets. If you look at that, I don't think there is landscaping, for example, on that. But they're not talking about mowing the lawns. They're talking about, every 5 years, you have to do some major replanting. That's the kind of thing that they've got on their report. And I do think it's possible to take those items, you would never bond plants, right? So I do think items like that, it is possible to take those and say, okay, we're not going to wait until 5 years from now when all the plants have to be redone. We're going to give Sean a little bit more in his budget each year, so that he can replace some of the plants each year, or some of the toilet seats, or whatever it is. But I don't think we want to give him enough money so that he's effectively has enough money to replace the signage every year and to fix the parking lot every year. Just because those items happen to cost less than $10,000, therefore they're showing up on operating. Therefore, we're assuming that he needs that money in his operating budget. Does that make sense?
I think it
Yeah,
makes sense.
that makes sense. Yep. But
May
so
I
where
ask,
does that?
what's the document that you're referring to, Jane? Is this, when was that sent?
Well,
It was last year at some point because the on-site insight
Okay.
report got refreshed, and then Peter went through the whole thing and did some kind of wizardry with it, and then turned it
Okay.
into a useful document.
It's the most checked out book at the library. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say that.
So I don't know, Peter, if you have a copy of that handy, maybe you can just email that to Wasim. Just make sure he's got it.
Those are all deliberations that we're going to have in future months, right? And when we sit down with Sean and go through DPW.
Yeah, I guess to
in
me
terms
the
of how
question
it
is
affects the guidance, how it affects our guidance letter, we're still on the same page that we're level funding plus COLA.
Yeah,
Or
I think so.
maybe we're not. I don't know.
The only slight hesitation I have, and not that I'm eager to give people bigger budgets, but does the inflation, the increase in inflation make it less likely that it is realistic for them to have a level budget on, the costs other than salaries?
Well, Dan, if you want to mention the chat you shared, which is pertinent to this piece.
Yeah, so I did a quick little forecast calculation of what the Social Security folks will do after next week's release of the Consumer Price Index. And it looks to me like the Social Security COLA could be closer to 6%, so bigger than what I said a few minutes ago. So if the custom is to track that in terms of what we do for COLA, that'll be a big number. And then picking up on Jane's point, we could think about the sorts of items that departments are purchasing beyond wages. What are the other things that they're purchasing on an ongoing basis? And those things will be more expensive this year than they were last year by some significant amount.
And what's the department that purchases most material? I mean, isn't it again DPW? Pretty much.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And certainly we know that all of the construction materials and road materials and all, they've all gone significantly up in price during the pandemic.
Right.
But again, to me, the purpose of guidance isn't necessarily to try to account for those types of things, because different departments are going to be affected by that type of inflation differently, right? And I don't think we're trying to go through and say, well, we think that the fire department isn't buying a lot of stuff, so they shouldn't need more, but the DPW is, so they should need more. I think that's the type of thing where we say, all right, level funding, just justify your increases. So each department is going to come back to us and say, all right, well, I'm sorry, but the cost of these things has gone up by 10% last year. And so this number's got to go up. And we say, okay. And then some of the more industrious department heads can find other places in their budget that they can reduce to offset that a little bit, where they can find a different way of doing things that doesn't require reams and reams of paper. And maybe they just decide we don't need to print everything out anymore because paper is costing too much and printers cost too much, so I think that's one of the things that we try to impress upon the department heads, is try to find more efficient and cost-effective ways of doing your business. And level funding helps with that, because it's like some things that they have to buy are going to cost more, and then they can try to find other ways to offset it. And we understand, and all the department heads understand that the budget's not actually going to be level, and it's just a matter of they have to come and justify their increases and have that discussion with us. I think where we got with DPW is that the increase due to the request from capital budget and advisory in previous years that he move operating out of capital, it was going to blow his budget out of the water. And so that's why I was considering acknowledging that in the guidance letter. I do believe that it makes total sense to not have exceptions and just to have a universal guidance. I think that it is therefore, I think, very important that the liaisons to DPW and town buildings make contact with Sean and explain that to him before he works on his budget, and then ideally make contact with Addie May as well, so that as they are working on their budget after they receive the guidance letter, that they understand what the goal should be. And I don't know if Peter, if that means, I don't know, you may have to have a sit down with Sean and Addie May going over the on-site insight report in the way that Jane is sort of like suggesting, and figuring out, okay, well, let's take a look at all of the things that are really on this report for next year and figure out which of these things should reasonably get shifted to operating and which things are truly still capital expenses. And basically, have a more clear and organized budget for DPW and town buildings.
No, that's an excellent idea, Steve. We're in year three, I believe, of the on-site inside. We skipped a year because it was published. Last year was the first year we actually used it. And so we have to check off, and I'm just walking through the steps that you mentioned, what was actually accomplished. Maybe some things that were budgeted were accomplished. Maybe some things that weren't budgeted were accomplished because they could be. And then what's left and what's achievable in the next year, given guidance. So again, there's a lot of leeway there in the art, science, and common sense of approaching this. And again, buy-in from Sean and Addie May and the departments on how to attain those objectives within the guidance and funds that we have from taxes without drastically increasing the tax rate. The budget is everyone's objective because we all live in town and we want to make sure we efficiently use our tax dollars.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd be in favor of not using CPI and increase it and saying level funding plus whatever CPI is. We should challenge, like Steve said, challenge the efficiency of the departments and let them come to us and figure out if, case by case, if we need to adjust anything in their budgets. And certainly there will be some things. But if you look at, if it is 6% COLA versus 2%, that extra 4% on $30 million is like $1.2 million. So that's a big line item for us to have to absorb. And there's not a whole lot of leeway on that one, really, right? I mean, we've sort of historically committed to a number that's fair and appropriate.
If I could just circle back to the point that Jane had raised, and I don't know what the right way forward on this is, but just to push a little bit harder on it for a second. In a world when inflation has been very, very low, as it has been for the last 10 or 15 years, the zero baseline come back to us kind of makes sense because there's not that much happening, and hopefully there's modest efficiencies that every department can put in place every year to kind of make progress on that. If we go to an even more extreme case than where we are, and say inflation came in at 20%, then telling people, hey, level budgets, but come to us if that doesn't work, would just seem, I think, would seem strange to department heads. But really, you don't get it. We've got 20% inflation. Now, we're of course not in that world, but we are in a world where the numbers aren't the super low, as Steve pointed out, coming in less than 2% year after year after year. So, perhaps, I don't know, I mean, would there be something to says flat budget, but kind of just have half a sentence that acknowledges that, of course, we're in an environment where inflation's running higher, and that may affect what department heads want to put into their budgets? Or is that just opening a Pandora's box when everybody comes in with everything? Because that provides an opening for anything people want to do. I'm not sure what the right strategy is on that, but we are in a world that's different, at least this year, than hey, inflation is low year after year after year after year.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say I don't feel the need to sort of have a nod to the fact that inflation is higher than it has been. I mean, I feel like, at least so far, the department heads that we've worked with over the past couple of years, I think they're pretty reasonable. They try their best, and when they can't, they ask us for increases. And I don't think that we chop their heads off usually when they come to us with a reasonable request. So I think that I think that the department heads, where they can't find another way, they will simply increase their budget because costs have gone up, and that's reasonable, you know. So I don't think, you know, right, unless barring a situation where inflation jumps to 20%, you know, like I don't feel the need to acknowledge that. So I think I'm okay with the level budget and COLA situation. I guess I would ask, who is the personnel board liaison?
I am.
Okay. Would you be able to kind of touch base with them and just kind of find out if and when they are planning on meeting to discuss and maybe vote on
Yep.
a COLA?
Yeah, I already emailed them while we were talking. So.
Oh, okay. Oh, actually, look, Nancy's here. Nancy, you're on the personnel board, right? Go ahead.
I am. Oops. Are you hearing me?
I can hear you, and whatever you're playing, but you can just talk over it. It's fine.
Okay, shut that down. We are underway in researching what a COLA is. Now, I just want to remind you that the COLA that we recommend to you really only affects a small piece of your budget, because it's for the non-union, non-contracted, non-school people. So we are surveying other towns and looking into some of the labor statistics and so forth. So it's early for most people to know what their town is going to do, but we're going to try to get some kind of, because we try to also connect with the towns that we compete in the market for personnel, as well as what the statistics are. So, and I'd be very interested if Dan would share that link that he's using to access information with me. I would appreciate that at some point in time. But yes, we have already had a meeting to discuss how we should approach this, because I was at your last meeting where you were talking about putting the guidance, and I did point out to them that you usually like to have some sense of what you're going to ask people to try to stay within. So we're working on that to see if we can get a number to you as quickly as possible. So, and I said at that meeting that you were contemplating putting a 2% in your guidance, and nobody objected to that because we have no basis for saying anything different right now. So you do what you're comfortable with, and we'll come up with what we will recommend as fair and equitable in the market that we're living in right now.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think ultimately we do want to be fair, and I think that I would like for our guidance letter to reflect the actual percentage that the personnel board is going to be recommending, because I would prefer that it not be, you know, we say 3% and then you guys say 5% or vice versa, you know, because that's sending mixed messages probably to the department heads.
Well, when are you actually shooting to get this letter out?
Well, we always shoot for October 31st, and we never hit it. But the last item of business will ultimately be to set our next meeting date. And in my head, I was thinking 2 weeks from now. I could potentially push it out to something like 3 weeks from now. But I think I would like to try to get one advisory meeting in before the end of October, where I will truly have a guidance letter for everybody to look at and hopefully edit and then subsequently approve. So if Personnel Board were able to have a meeting in the next 2 weeks to set your recommendation, that would be very helpful to us. And even if you don't set it, if you were even able to sort of have informal kind of communications with Natalie or with me so that we get an idea of where you think Personnel Board is going to land on that, even that information would be helpful to me, I think.
Okay, I shall contact our chairman and see if we can put our heads together.
Thank you.
Steve, I'll just quickly add, I will next Wednesday send around when those numbers come out. I'll send that around, Nancy, to you and to everybody else, just so people can have the numbers. I was also going to mention, Steve, one thing that goes in your direction is it's true that inflation is running high now, but lots of economists think that it's a COVID thing, it's a supply chain thing, and that those numbers are going to come down. So it's not like we've entered this new curve of high inflation. We have a bad year here.
Okay.
Right. I was actually going to make that exact comment, right? That's why the Federal Reserve has not increased the interest rates.
Correct.
Right? So,
Correct.
So it is expected to be a temporary increase.
Yeah.
And so that comment also applies to, the 0%, the level funding that is.
Yes, absolutely. It absolutely does. That, maybe that's maybe that's fine because it's just 1 year. It's not like a new regime.
Right.
And contrary to what I said before, the COLA increase wouldn't have that big of an effect, that I guess, because it only affects a certain amount of employees.
Right.
Okay.
I guess, Deb, do you know in the sort of budget model Excel spreadsheet version, what if you apply a, pick your own number for a COLA percentage, is the data in that spreadsheet sort of accurate enough to only pick out the non-contract employees for that percentage? Or does it just apply whatever percentage you choose to every salary line, regardless of whether it was a contract or non-contract department?
There's really no huge spreadsheet that does that, but we do have a separate spreadsheet that of all those employees that Nancy's talking about, that I could just, do it quickly on that spreadsheet. That's not a big deal to change the percentages. But each department has their own spreadsheet, and then there's not like one where it's just like, 3% for everybody. It's a little bit more complicated than that. But we do have that spreadsheet for the non-union people. That would be really easy just to put the numbers in.
Okay.
Deb, do you have, if I can interrupt, Deb, do you have the spreadsheet budget model that hopefully was handed down from Sharon?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And because from memory, it may have segregated departments that were contracted from non-contracted, which gets to Steve's point. So if we plug in one number,
I don't think so, Peter.
I
don't remember that. I remember like we always were, going through this discussion that's saying, no, I put 2% and it applies to everyone, right? So that's going to be, I think that used to, the spreadsheet did not really only apply to the non-contracted, non-unionized employees. I don't think so.
Well, we can fix that this year.
Well, but historically though, and not that we can't change our minds, but historically we did that intentionally because we didn't want to send the message, whatever gets negotiated by the unions, we're fine with it. Do you know what I mean? We wanted to keep sending the message that, that this is the right number for COLA. And so everybody should pretty much be in the same ballpark. And if they're not, well, then maybe you got to find the money somewhere else if you're just, negotiating very generous contracts that are above, typical cost of living. So we have
Yes,
that
yes, no, no, I'm
million-
not disagreeing with you, Jane. I think I was just making the comment that the spreadsheet, I don't recall it allowing us to separate, but anyway, yes,
No,
sorry, I didn't mean to disagree with you, no.
No, I didn't think you were. All I'm saying is that I think you're right. And I also think that, we had done that intentionally. If we want to change our minds about how we handle that, of course we can. But, we did that for a reason, at least in recent memory.
Yeah, that is
Yes.
tricky though, right? Because this year that might work against us if we end up setting COLA at 5%. Is a decent chance that none of the contracts have got a 5% COLA year over year. So that may actually work against us this year.
True.
But we could also make the argument that fair is fair, right? And if we were going to try to hold everybody to 2% when inflation was low, then theoretically we should allow more when the inflation has, and that would be a way, because especially now that legally operating expenses and salary are not separated. If we gave everybody a 4%, 5% COLA, then that would build a little bit of basically inflation related extra money into their overall operating budget. They wouldn't have to use it for salary. They could use it for something else, but
That's true.
Okay. Well, I guess it does sound like we're basically probably going to go with level funding. That's going to be what my draft letter shows. I will pick a number for the COLA that'll probably be based on information that Dan sends us next week. And hopefully if I can get some either preliminary or final recommendation from Nancy or the personnel board in general, I can incorporate that. I think
Steve,
Deb-
I apologize for interrupting, but the historical inflation is always in the rear view mirror. And if Dan or some of his other economic compatriots could come up or write about a forward-looking inflationary projection, that's really what we want, because again, we don't care what happened in the rearview mirror, it's really going forward. And if it is episodic, COVID related, et cetera, spike in inflation that's not represented in other markets, then we have more tailwind to go with a more reasonable inflationary number.
So I can certainly include what might be called the consensus forecast of inflation going forward over the next year. But of course, these forecasts sometimes are right and sometimes are wrong. Of course, Peter, as you said, it's backward looking. But of course, last year, the COLA people got in January was much below what inflation turned out to actually be.
Right. I think in reality, it's a market correction, right? So it's like we gave them 2% last year, and actually prices went up by 6% over the past year. And boy, that probably sucks for them. So we're correcting for that now this year. So I think that again, like Nancy said, having a fair and equitable COLA, I think is a reasonable goal. And I would say, I guess, Deb, if you could basically try to work on that budget model version 1, and I guess for the time being, do a flat percentage across all of the salaries the way that we have in previous years, because again, if we made everybody 2% in the previous years, regardless of their contract, then I think that if we're going to be making a recommendation for a higher COLA, then that probably should fly as well. I guess for the time being, maybe on version 1, make it a 4% COLA, and then we'll see where it goes from there. And then also try to incorporate the new growth numbers and the overlay in the way that we were discussing with Wendy earlier.
Already?
And I'd say that if you need to find the source for that 320-ish thousand that goes into the overlay, I would probably take it from free cash for the time being, as opposed to levying it, because in my mind, if we levy that amount, essentially you're just double dipping, right? You're saying we're supposed to get $320,000 from the utilities from taxes, but we're not getting that right now. So instead, we're going to tax everybody in town that same amount again. That feels wrong to me.
But if there's a year that we can actually levy a little bit more and the growth will support that, it's this year.
Yeah, Steve, you don't want to touch free cash.
Yeah, because isn't that exactly what S&P had a problem with? That would effectively be using free cash to lower the tax rate, which is what we're already in trouble for.
I guess I don't know, that feels tricky to me, right? Because we wouldn't be using free cash to lower the tax rate. We would be using free cash to set the tax rate where it's supposed to be.
Well, but you could just as easily argue, well, it isn't supposed to be there because we know we're not going to get the money. So how can we count chickens that we don't have? You know what I mean?
I think the government accounting takes care of that. And so it will offset that overlay. And yes, the tax rate will be higher until resolved. And we can carry that overlay for a few years, and as it works its way through the court adjudication. But that is what it is. That's the way we have to present it in financial statements, which flows into calculating the tax rate for any given year.
So you're saying that we should basically levy the rest of the town the amount that we're not getting from the utilities?
I think we have to. Because we're not getting it's.
We could do what Steve is saying. We could use free cash, but that's gotten us into trouble in the past.
May I ask, isn't our free cash going to be at high levels already? Because am I remembering incorrectly? There was about I don't know the number. There was a large amount returned. There's net surplus. A large amount was returned to us already from the end of last year. Plus, we'll be getting 45% of that $650K from the regional school district as well. So will our free cash coffers not already be overflowing?
And if that's the case,
free cash. I think we have plenty of free cash. The question is, and so maybe that's the answer. There's so much free cash that S&P won't mind that we're using it again to lower the tax rate. I don't know.
Well, S&P didn't mind that we were using free cash. What they minded was our net equity, our retained earnings were decreasing. So we were burning through equity. And I think that's the line on the balance sheet that was decreasing. And the cause of that was a number of things, one being the use of free cash. So it's the net effect. They want to show the value of the town increasing, which by conserving cash and taxing more than we're using, it falls to the bottom line, but not too much because we're overtaxing. And so there's a balancing act there.
Peter, I do agree with you on that. I think that because other towns have voted to use free cash to lower their tax rates, and I think that it was because we were in a precarious position, and especially where this in a way is not quite, we're lowering the tax rate because of an unusual situation. It's not an they also don't want you to show that it's kind of an operating budget expense. This is more going to be a limited expense until the lawsuit gets settled. And what Wendy was saying earlier, you know, we're going to get more than 50%, even if they renegotiate and say, we'll settle on 75% of assessment, we're going to get 25% more. So we're not going to lose more money. So I think with Standard & Poor, we have a very good argument to say this is kind of a temporary situation out of our control because of the lawsuit being in appeals. It's not an operating continual thing. We're not operating as a deficit.
The only thing I would point out though is that yes, we think we're going to have healthy free cash this year, but if this is a 2, 3, potentially up to 5-year situation, and we're not as lucky with free cash in all of those years, then that could be a really ugly uptick in the in the tax rate in those years.
It's true. And the other thing is, if we have free cash, maybe that's what we use to pay off some capital and we don't convert it to debt, which causes an increase in taxes. It does spread it out over the years, not as a hit on the 300, but it might be a good year to try and pay off some capital expenses that come up instead of financing them.
Well, the key, Heidi, and you've heard me say this, is to keep the servicing of debt constant. So as we retire debt, replacing it, that's budget neutral. And that's the art, which is much beyond just your control. It's who's asking for capital. And then when you go to the bond market, that's where the truth be told.
Right,
is what our servicing will be.
But because of the library, we're not exactly being budget neutral right now because the library portions of borrowing have not come before you. You're doing the capital expenses, but then I've had a couple million now from the library that haven't gone through you to take into account when you're doing your review. So I agree that yes, we should be budget. Yep. There, yeah. I just think it's one thing that has not been on advisory's agenda, horizon.
Oh, it's been on the horizon. It just keeps on moving away. It's been on the horizon for years.
Right, but it's like, and I counted on, we have 1 million something, and we've approved in capital this year, $1 million from prior, and all of a sudden I have to borrow 2 more millions for the library over these last 2 years. That doubles what we thought we were looking at with capital budget items. So that it really doubled my debt costs in these last 2 years, which weren't discussed during the capital budget of how much we could afford and what the impact was going to be.
It would be good to project that in your 5-year plan. Just plug it into some year, right. If you floated it at current rates, what the service would be. Just so that we do have a placeholder, because you're absolutely right. It is that building has a gate around it or a fence around it. Someday it will open. Right. And when it does, the costs will be borne in terms of servicing that debt. Right.
No, and it's going up. Plus, we know the school roofs are coming. I mean, I'm hearing the money about the school turnbacks. I would love it if that could somehow go to pay the school roofs and we don't get hit with that cost.
A couple thoughts here, if I may. One, I agree with you on that last, I'll take them in reverse order. That last point, I agree, it'd be great if they could just keep it and pay for the roofs with that money, but I feel like we kind of got burned on something like that in previous years. I would rather see the money flow back to us. We can hold on to it, and knowing that the roofs are coming, and maybe if we've got something, I guess maybe that's like one of those stabilization type funds whereby we know we're putting something aside for future capital requests that's not formally part of the stabilization fund, but a separate bucket of accounting.
Yes, so that's on my list too, to bring up that concept.
Mm-hmm. And then 2, so I recognize that really what you're suggesting there is that to spend some of the free cash on the capital projects that are in front of us at the moment, I get it, we got to do something with the free cash. And in truth, my initial instincts were that borrowing is so cheap, I'd rather borrow for long-term capital projects. However, recognizing that as a municipality, we can't necessarily invest that free cash in anything that's going to get us returns above the cost of borrowing. Yeah, you're right. Maybe you just use the cash
That's-
to pay for capital.
Right. Our investment opportunities are very limited and they're not great yields.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to I'm happy to contact Standard & Poor and ask them about using the free cash right now to try and offset this, whether, to reduce the tax rate is the effect, but see what they would say.
Yeah, that would probably be good. Also, I think if do we know where our free cash stands currently after sort of last year's the fiscal 22 budgetary turnbacks, and then also the school's recent turnback? Do we know where our free cash stands, especially as a percentage of the overall budget?
That'd be a question. Yeah.
Yeah, no, we really don't.
Because if we can figure out like,
there
oh,
yet.
we're actually over 5%, then it's like, well, then we kind of have to use some free cash for some stuff, right?
Right.
How hard would it be to figure that out?
I'm not 100% sure since I've never done it before, but I can take a look into it.
Jane, were you going to say something?
I was asking the same question you were, Steve.
Okay, yeah. All right, so let's do that. Heidi, if you can contact S&P and find out basically how they would view this scenario, since it's a kind of a weird scenario, and whether using free cash seems reasonable to them. And then Deb, if you can try to figure out where our actual free cash stands right now, in terms of percentage wise, I'm mostly worried about how close or over 5% we are.
Okay.
I would say
Deb,
maybe
it's-
for.
I'm sorry, Steve. Deb, it's formulaic. There's a pretty set formula. And if you have the complete financials for 2021, we're in 22, we're budgeting 23
Right.
for 2021, it should be a plug and play,
Right.
supposedly. 'Cause-
Yeah, right. 2021 is not finalized though. So that's why
Okay.
I hesitate because I don't want to give you a number and then, when it is finalized, have it be a number that's very different than that.
Yeah.
But I
No.
will do my best.
Understood.
Yeah. No, we won't hold you to it. I think that I'm just trying to get a sense for a ballpark figure of where our free cash is at right now.
Alrighty.
But then I would say if you can work on that that version 1 of the budget model again,
Sure.
let's start with 4% COLA to all departments, and then incorporate the new growth as Wendy discussed. And how about, to be conservative, let's don't take that that increase in the overlay, don't take that from free cash. Let's just levy it so that we can kind of see worst case scenario what our tax rate's going to look like.
Alrighty.
And then we'll go from there.
All right. Sounds good.
Any other comments about guidance? All right, then I'll move on. Last 2 items. One is approving the minutes of last meeting, and then setting our next meeting. So I believe everybody should have gotten the revised minutes from Brendan, and then let me share my screen here. Okay, how's that? Can everyone read that?
Yes.
All right. Any additional comments or edits to this? I believe this was all okay with me. right, if there are no additional edits to this, can I get a motion to approve the minutes of the September 8th, 2021 meeting as drafted by Brendan Daly?
So moved.
I move approval of the September 8th, 2021 meeting minutes.
Second.
All right, let's get a vote. Mark Albers,
Aye.
Peter Galatano,
Aye.
Dan Sickle,
Aye.
Natalie Weir,
Aye.
Wasim Basili,
Aye.
Jane Matarazzo, Steve Leahy,
Aye.
Brendan Daly.
Aye.
All right, I'm also an aye. So the minutes are approved unanimously. All right, so then last item would be next meeting. So again, in an ideal world, I would like to get the guidance letter out by October 31st. So that leaves us, we could do October 20th or October 27th.
Would the
And if
20th
those
give you enough time, Steve?
I don't know. Given that it's going to be kind of the same letter as last year with some blah blah COVID unprecedented introduction, and then yeah, same as usual. It shouldn't take me more than 2 weeks. It's just a matter of me deciding to sit down and do it.
Either one works for me. No preference.
Ditto.
Same here.
Okay. All right. So let's set the next meeting for Wednesday, October 20th. All right. Any, I think that's the last thing. So can I get a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
And seconded.
And seconded. All right. Everybody say aye.
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 Thank you all.
Meeting's
Thank
adjourned at 9:59. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.